Chapter 47. The prize booth was exactly what it sounded like. There was a long, glass-fronted cabinet filled with smaller, less valuable trinkets, while the bigger high-ticket items hung on the wall, grouped by price. Perched on top of the counter were small, computerized kiosks with colorful touch screens and ticket eaters. Just scan your hand to begin. The pixelated screen flashed. My spelunker's sixth sense didn't send up any sort of warning, but still I hesitated. Just because the computer wasn't overtly a trap didn't mean it couldn't bone me in the long run. Sure, it probably wouldn't explode or eat my hand when I touched it, but it could activate some asinine and improbable Rube Goldberg machine that would leave me running away from a sentient Indiana Jones boulder that wanted to grind me into meat paste. I glanced at Croc, who simply bobbed its head. "Nothing to worry about here, Dan," that gesture said. Reluctantly, I pressed my palm against the scanner and felt the familiar warm buzz I'd come to associate with activating a progenitor monolith. The screen flickered and a message appeared. "Welcome, Dan Woodridge, specimen biotag ID number 038-01-B00R7T569C, to the Loot Arcade Prize Gallery Redemption Kiosk. The Prize Gallery tab has been successfully added to your progenitor monolith interface menu. Loot Arcade location, Funtime Frank's Jungle Gym Jamboree has been added to your Prize Gallery tab. Insert your tickets now to redeem amazing prizes." There was a rectangular slot on the side of the machine that I could feed the tickets into, but since it seemed the tickets would be permanently linked to my specimen bio report, we decided to split them first. I'd paid for most of the games from my own pocket, but I wouldn't have been able to clear half as many games without Jacob, Temperance, and Croc to lend a hand, or a tentacle, in the mimic's case. In theory, the tickets were mine by right, but hoarding them wouldn't win me any friends. Plus, I needed the others to be at the top of their game when we went toe-to-toe against Funtime Frank. Jacob politely declined when I offered him a share, which didn't entirely surprise me, and Croc wouldn't be able to use the relics anyway. Dwellers evolved their own relics as they advanced in cross-specific evolutionary thresholds. Temperance, on the other hand, was more than happy to accept. I graciously gave her a third of the haul, 3,091 tickets, in total. That left me 6,182 tickets to spend, which I promptly fed into the kiosk. They disappeared with a mechanized whirl, like a fat kid inhaling a fruit roll-up, and a new ticket balance immediately appeared on the screen. The prize system worked a bit like a giant vending machine. Each item had a price tag along with a redemption code, prominently displayed on a little placard. All I had to do was punch the code into the computer and, assuming I had the tickets to pay, the item would instantly appear inside my storage space. Just like magic. I did idly wonder what would happen if I vaulted over the glass-fronted counter and started pulling relics off the wall display, but Jacob strongly disabused me of the notion. Turned out, that was how Delvers earned a one-way ticket to floor. "You cheated." And that was a floor no one ever came back from. Not ever. So, because I had no desire to die a horrific death stretched over the course of slow and painful years, I played by the rules. Smaller artifacts and insert sigils, ranging from 50 to 3,000 tickets, were held within the glass display case. On the lower end were common artifacts with empty effect slots, but the prize booth also had uncommon and even rare artifacts with some genuinely badass abilities. A pair of augmented reality glasses created a real-time HUD overlay that would allow the user to see traps and identify mimics, in a close approximation of my spelunker's sixth sense. There was a pricey vial of bioluminescent tattoo ink, which had unique properties. I got the sense that the ink itself didn't actually do anything, but rather was a component in some larger ritual. A pair of red and white high-top sneakers, Get Air Gordons, allowed the wearer to literally walk on air for up to 30 seconds per day. There was even a pair of silver AirPods, which instantly translated any foreign language in earshot. That item was extremely tempting. But at 3,000 tickets, I had to reluctantly pass. An elegant brass key, appropriately called a quantum skeleton key, had my name written all over it, even though it didn't have any immediate combat or survival utility. The key could be inserted into a wide array of locks and would quantum shift between realities until it found one where the object in question was already unlocked, then duplicate that status. In essence, it was the ultimate lockpick. Apparently, it wouldn't work on things like arcane seals or quantum locks, but it would still work for 99% of the other locks I'd run across so far. I dropped 750 tickets on the key and didn't even bat an eye. Next up was a strange pry bar about the length of my forearm with an angled hook on one end and what appeared to be an engraver's awl on the other. The apprentice trapmouth's pry bar. There were a wide range of different tools that would be trapmouths used to disarm, move, or repurpose traps, and this was one of them. Even though I didn't know how it worked, the potential was too good to pass up, and all for the low price of 150 tickets. Practically a steal. There was also a common-grade weapon sigil for a measly 250 tickets that caught my eye. Simply called boomerang bound, it could be attached to any melee weapon. When thrown, the weapon would automatically boomerang, returning to the thrower's hand after successfully hitting a target. Having a physical, ranged attack seemed like a great option on the off chance that I ran out of mana in the middle of a fight and didn't want to wade elbow deep into the battle. I even knew what I wanted to attach it to. My tactical speed square. The speed square was basically the poor man's version of a boomerang, and if I could make it magically boomerang back into my hand, I'd finally be able to live out my boyhood fantasy of transforming into Batman and curb-stomping shitheads. Although there were countless other weapon and armor sigils I wanted to snag, I needed to choose carefully. This stuff was expensive with a capital E, and I still had relics to pick through. The common-grade relics were all decent quality and had a standard price tag of 1,000 tickets per relic. Extremely pricey, considering it had cost more than 2 silver loot tokens to earn that many tickets. But relics were the one thing you couldn't buy from the gachapan machines, and you could examine the relics at the prize booth before purchasing, so you knew exactly what you were getting. In my estimation, it was hard to put a price tag on that kind of convenience. The uncommon grade relics were 2,000 tickets a pop, and the rares, which were few and far between, ranged from 3,000 all the way up to 5,000 tickets. There were several relics that left me salivating, but I didn't want to risk changing my build too drastically right before facing off against Funtime Frank and his 5-man band. Going into the big game with a bunch of untested abilities that I didn't really understand was a surefire way to end up dead. But there was one I couldn't pass up. Mental micromanagement was a rare great relic that topped the scale at 5,000 tickets. Despite the high price, it had incredible potential for someone like me with high resonance and abysmal athleticism. Mental micromanagement. Rare relic, level 1. Range, line of sight. Cost, 1 mana a minute. Mind over matter isn't just one of those bullshit slogans found at the bottom of motivational posters. Not for you anyway. Those bestowed with mental micromanagement can weave invisible telekinetic strings around any object weighing less than 35 pounds. Whether you're lifting a key from afar, guiding a blade through the air, or fetching a couple of cold brewskis from the fridge without getting up, this skill bridges the gap between thought and reality. Each new level enables you to control an additional object, turning the solo act into a full-blown telekinetic orchestra. Word of warning, though, trying to mentally control too many items at once is a good way to give yourself a brain aneurysm, and no, that's not a joke. The mana cost per minute also doubles with each additional item you telekinetically wield. This relic enables mana usage. The idea of actively giving myself a brain aneurysm was worrisome, but gaining the ability to control objects with my mind offset any potential risk. The weight limit was a bit restrictive and meant I wouldn't be able to hurl my enemies through the air or use it to toss rock across the field of battle, but that was fine. My hammer was only 19 ounces after all, and if I could use it to beat the ever-living shit out of enemies a football field away, I'd be happy as a pig in shit. Plus, the more I leveled the relic up, the more weapons I'd be able to wield from afar. I couldn't help but recall the battle between the Flayed Monarch and the Boundless Wanderer. In my head, I saw an army of blooded weapons zipping through the air, hacking and slashing at the dusty gunslinger from a dozen angles all at once. Whatever relic the monarch had used to accomplish the feat was clearly leaps and bounds above this one, but they were clearly in the same vein. And if I could use the codex to forge it with other powerful relics, maybe I'd be able to turn this skill into one that could rival the monarch, given enough time. Buying the relic would take up almost all of my remaining tickets, and I waffled for a couple of minutes. I could pick up 2 uncommons and a common for the same cost. But after looking everything on offer over for a second time, I decided I'd rather have one super badass relic that complemented my skill set instead of 3 mediocre ones that I probably wouldn't even end up using in the long run. Taking a deep breath, I pulled the trigger on mental micromanagement, leaving me with a grand total of 32 tickets. Not enough for jack shit else, though the remaining balance stayed on my new prize gallery tab. Loot in hand and feeling weary to the bone, I planted my VIP doorway anchor, and we made our way back to the store to clean up, gear up, and catch a little bit of shut-eye before our final showdown with Funtime Frank. Chapter 48. The shop was bustling with activity, even though I was hearing more and more rumors about aspirants poking around. The various door was scattered about the floors. It didn't seem to be stopping anyone from venturing into the storefront, not yet anyway, but that could change if the aspirants managed to blockade all of the doors in and out. Although I could move the doorway anchors once every 24 hours, exiting through any of the given doorways could also drop me or my customers directly into an ambush. I'd need to do something about those jerk-offs eventually. For now, though, taking down Funtime Frank and establishing a trade partnership with the Delvers of Howler's Hold was still my top priority. But there were a few logistical issues that needed to be taken care of before we headed back out. With foot traffic picking up, Princess Pony Puff and Baby Hands were having a tough time handling the influx of new customers. Baby Hands was still dumb as a painted rock, and even as capable as Pony Puff seemed to be, she could still only do so much. With the addition of the new concession stand, the simple fact was that I didn't have enough hands on deck to keep things running smoothly. I needed to scale up. There were a few options on the metaphorical table. I could add one new cannon fodder golem for every 5,000 square feet of claimed space. But even with the addition of the monolith and the new concession stand, I was still only at 14,291 square feet. Just over 700 square feet shy of what I'd need to be able to forge a new minion. There was nothing preventing me from going out and tacking on enough space to spawn another golem, but that felt irresponsible. I wanted all of my square footage to count, and randomly slapping on something just for the added space seemed like a bad long-term choice. My other option was to destroy Baby Hands and craft a new, smarter minion, but I had reservations about that too. Sure, Baby Hands was dumber than a wet blanket. And yes, he wasn't actually a person at all. But Baby Hands was a hard worker, and I trusted the necklace garbage golem 100 times more than Pony Puff. Plus, Croc would be devastated if I killed him. The pair of them really were like two peas in a pod, and when Croc wasn't hanging around with me, he was off playing with a taciturn golem. I couldn't kill Croc's second best friend in the whole world just because it was the smart thing to do. I mean, I could, technically, but I wasn't a monster. Which left me with one option. Hire some extra help. I headed over to the cash register and took the visitor log from Pony Puff. The pony-headed minion was drinking a 40-ounce bottle of malt liquor, called Alley King Gold, while simultaneously chain-smoking cigarettes. Beside her, an ashtray held a small mountain of crumpled butts. Strictly speaking, Pony Puff didn't have lungs or internal organs, so I wasn't quite sure how she was managing to day drink and smoke like a chimney, but I'd given up trying to figure out the physics of this place weeks ago. She idly bleated at me like an angry goat, but then went back to reading a glossy magazine as soon as she realized I just needed a guest logbook. I scanned the list of names and saw a few familiar ones as well as a couple of new ones. I dismissed the newcomers right away. The level 18 was still here, camped out in one of the tents. According to the log, his name was Michael Bolton, though I was pretty sure he wasn't the Michael Bolton 80s pop sensation superstar with classic hits, such as How Am I Supposed to Live Without You? And Can I Touch You? There. At least, I didn't think so. Though upon further reflection, there was a certain resemblance. The Michael Bolton hiding out in the tent had to be in his mid to late 60s, which put him around the right age, and he had a mane of wild silver hair that cascaded down around his shoulders. Was it possible that the Michael Bolton was sleeping in my storage room? No. That was crazy. Probably. Didn't matter. Even if it was the Michael Bolton, the guy was level 18 and as jumpy as a Marine fresh home from an active combat zone. The guy had wicked PTSD and I wouldn't trust him with a pair of bootlaces. I definitely wasn't going to trust him to help run the store. Jacob was on the roster as well, but I needed his help to take out Funtime Frank, so that was no good. That left just two names. I headed into the sleeping area and nudged Taylor, the college girl from Oklahoma, awake with the toe of my boot. She was snoring softly on one of the cots, while her friend Stephanie was asleep on the floor beside her, curled up in a thick sleeping bag that had probably come from one of the sporting goods stores. Taylor had managed to crawl her way up to level 7, while her friend had made it to level 6. Not too bad at all, considering they didn't have any of my obvious advantages. Taylor startled awake and shot up, eyes wide in a mixture of fear and rage, one hand thrust out while another dropped toward the knife stashed at her hip. "You don't need to do that," I said, backing up a few steps and raising my hands to show they were empty. At the same time, I mentally prepared to cast Sterilization Field, which would neutralize any hostile magic she tossed my way. "Not looking to hurt you. Just wanted to make you and your friend there a job offer." She grunted, eyes darting left and right. Finally, when she seemed certain that I wasn't about to harvest her kidneys, she lowered her hand and shook her friend awake. She never took her eyes off me, though, which was smart. I mean, I wasn't going to do anything to her, but she didn't know that. And not trusting anyone in the back rooms was survival rule 101. Her friend blinked and sat up after a moment, rubbing the sleep from her eyes with one hand. "Everything okay?" Stephanie asked groggily. She didn't seem to be nearly as alert as her friend. Then something seemed to click inside her head and her eyes opened comically wide, gaze swinging back and forth between me and Taylor. "Hey, you're the guy, right? Discount Dan. Like, this survival tip brought to you by Discount Dan." One and the same. I took a few steps back and lowered my hands. "Like I was telling your friend, I'm not here to hurt you. Just the opposite. I'm wondering if the two of you might be interested in doing a little work around the shop." "What kind of work?" Taylor growled, swinging her legs out over the edge of the mattress. She looked like she was actively preparing to bolt if this conversation went sideways. "We're not doing weird sex shit, if that's what you're asking." "What? Weird sex shit?" I asked, brow furrowed. "No, I don't want you to do weird sex stuff. I want you to work the new hot dog stand." I faltered. "You want us to work a hot dog stand?" Taylor repeated, voice flat and dry as the Sahara. "Yeah, you know what?" I replied. Hearing myself say that out loud, I can sort of see how you could get the wrong impression, but I can assure you that working the hot dog stand is not in any way a euphemism for weird sex stuff. It's an actual hot dog stand, though it has more than hot dogs. There's pizza, nachos, fries, and also hot dogs. The food gives slight buffs and comes pre-made. I just need someone to work the stand. Deliver the food, accept payment. That kind of thing. Why don't you get one of your weird trash monsters to help?" Stephanie asked, standing from her spot on the floor. She looked a little more relaxed than her friend, but her hand had come to rest on the pommel of a hunting knife, dangling from a belt slung around her hips. "It's complicated," I replied, "but the long and short of it is that I can't make another for a little while yet, and the store is getting too busy for the two golems I do have to handle everything. Point is, I need some extra hands to help around here. It'll come with pay and perks." "What kind of pay and perks?" Taylor asked. "You can share a cot on the house," I replied, "plus you can take as much food as you want from the concession stand." I'll also give you a 10% store discount on anything else, including relics and artifacts. They shared a quick, subtle look between each other, but neither made a move to leave. Look, if you don't want the job, it's no sweat off my back. I hooked a thumb toward one of the tents. I'll just go ask Michael Bolton. I bet he'd be more than happy to take me up on the offer. Wait, Taylor said, Michael Bolton's here? Like the My Secret Passion Michael Bolton? No, not that Michael Bolton, I said, shaking my head. At least, I don't think so, I amended after a moment. Finally, Stephanie reached over and squeezed Taylor's wrist. The motion was subtle, but I caught it out of the corner of my eye. Yeah, okay, Taylor offered, finally pulling her hand away from the dagger at her belt. Show us what we have to do. Before I could get the girls set up, I needed to do a little rearranging. When I'd added the concession stand, it had randomly attached itself back by the pharmacy, which was no bueno. The placement made no sense, and once we got the pharmacy up and working, having both things shoved back in the corner would create floor congestion. Using the blanket Ford interface, I moved the electronics section, which had been located not far from the front checkout counter, and relocated the concession stand. The stand fit neatly between checkout and the photo booth. It was the perfect location. Good foot traffic and excellent visibility. Plus, Pony Puff would be able to keep an eye on Taylor and Stephanie without having to actively leave checkout. I had the two girls help me move a couple of plastic folding tables, previously stashed in the storage room, along with a couple of folding chairs. We set the two tables up in front of the stand so folks would have a place to sit and eat. It wasn't fine dining by any stretch of the imagination, but it was a damn bit better than eating a blistering hot magma calzone on a cot in the storage room. Once that was done, I spent a half hour or so walking the two college girls through the concession stand, showing them around and laying out what they would be responsible for. I had Baby Hands shadow me so he could act as their direct supervisor. I didn't have a lot of faith in the golem, but he seemed to pick up most of what I was laying down. The girls would work in 8-hour shifts, with an overlapping 4-hour break between, so they could still go out and grind levels together for a few hours each day. The concession stand operations were extremely simple, and the stand itself generated the food without any need for cooking. Mostly, they would be there to serve the food and collect cash. Well, shards anyway. Taylor still didn't seem like she entirely trusted me, but free food and housing was hard to say no to. By the time we were done, the food stand was already starting to draw a small crowd of hungry delvers, all clamoring for a bite. Since Taylor and Stephanie had a handle on things, and I was dead on my feet, I slipped away to grab a bit of shut-eye. Chapter 49. Instead of beelining directly from my tent in the back, I headed over to the private employees-only bathroom to rinse off. I smelled like an unwashed armpit, and I was pretty sure there were chunks of something unspeakable stuck in my teeth. I brushed vigorously and nearly drowned myself with mouthwash, then wiped the blood, grime, and gore from my body. It took almost an entire pack of baby wipes to get the job done. I really needed to get some proper bathing facilities set up in here, complete with showers. Adding a washer and dryer probably wouldn't go amiss either, since my clothes smelled like rank butthole. Hell, my stench had probably freaked Taylor and Stephanie out more than anything else. I sprinkled a bit of medicated talc powder into my Daisy Dukes, then added a fresh layer of deodorant to help combat the lingering stench. Using the extra deodorant probably wasn't the smartest idea, since there were a fair number of dwellers who hunted by smell. But I figured they'd be able to smell my bow just as much as my deodorant, so it was 1/2 dozen or the other. At least this way, the people around me wouldn't also have to suffer. Mostly clean, I quickly hit up the monolith and distributed the 15 new personal enhancement points I'd earned from leveling up. I dropped a single point each into grit and preservation, bringing my grit up to 14 and preservation up to 8. Resonance was still my most important trait by a country mile, so I added another 9 points to that, which brought it to 39, and that was accounting for the hit from the Sendal Scale Malkairas relic. The last 4 points went into perception, bumping the stat up to 25. My health and stamina hardly budged at all, but my overall Monta pool inched up to 110 and my Monta Regan rate was just a hair beneath 9 Monta per minute. With my points taken care of, I finally slipped into my personal tent, which I tricked out with goods from the home decor aisle. There was an extra wide cot with a premium, full-sized air mattress on top. A gray area rug covered the otherwise cold floor. A folding camp chair sat in one corner beside a collapsible TV tray for meals. A small nightstand held a battery-powered lantern and a few other personal effects, fresh underwear, clean socks, a few extra shirts. It wasn't exactly home sweet home, but I'd certainly slept rougher. Hell, I'd crashed at job sites with nothing more than a painfully thin isomat and an emergency blanket to cover me. Compared to that, this was practically a luxury resort. I kicked my boots off and plopped into the chair. I badly needed to catch a few hours of shut-eye, but I was too worked up over my shiny new prizes from the arcade. After carefully looking through the relics already stashed away in my spatial core, I decided to swap Force Multiplier for mental micromanagement. Then, after a long beat, I opted to exchange Doodle Buddy for Bad Trip. I was sad to see Force Multiplier go, but fighting up close and personal just didn't make a whole lot of sense with my current build. Had this been a video game or RPG campaign, I would have been on the front line, swinging a sword or bare-knuckle brawling without a question. But this wasn't a game. This was my life. Truth was, spellcasting was devastatingly powerful, and with the compass of the catacomber, the higher my resonance and perception, the better off I'd be in the long run. It just didn't make sense for me to be hooking and jabbing. As for Doodle Buddy, I wasn't nearly as sad to see that particular relic go. I planned to hang on to it, since there was a good chance it would synergize with something down the road, but as a standalone skill it was rather disappointing. A fact that had become painfully obvious during the battle against Mohawk and the rest of his aspirant buddies. As a level 4, the summoned Doodle was little more than a speed bump to anything higher than level 10, which was just about everything on the 7th floor. And even though Bad Trip didn't deal any damage, it was a decent crowd control ability. A chilling tingle rippled through me when I quit Bad Trip. When I added mental micromanagement, on the other hand, I started to actively bleed from my nose, eyes, ears, and mouth. On top of that, a pounding headache roared through the inside of my skull and an intense wave of vertigo washed over me. It felt like the whole room was spinning drunkenly beneath me. I acutely remembered the warning from the relic description: this is a good way to give yourself a brain aneurysm, and no, that's not a joke. Despite the disclaimer, I had indeed thought the flavor text was just a joke. The sensation lasted for a solid 5 minutes before finally passing. I used a few more baby wipes to clean up the gore, but the fact that I was actively bleeding from several face holes was rather concerning. I was alive, though, and that was the important thing. I felt another wave of vertigo, though much less intense, when I activated the effect for the first time. Although I couldn't see anything, I distinctly felt a thin, shimmering line of power extend outward from my chest. The invisible strand of energy was no thicker than my pinky finger, and it almost felt like I'd grown another limb. But it was a weak, clumsy limb. Uncoordinated and alien. Almost like a newborn infant flailing its tiny hand around for the first time. The strand of mental energy wrapped around the wooden shaft of my hammer, and it floated upward, hanging on steadily in the air. It bobbed and weaved as great beads of sweat rolled down my face. Holy shitballs. This took a lot more effort than I'd been expecting. I'd broken my right arm in the 6th grade, and I'd ended up in a full arm cast that ran from bicep to palm. It wasn't a clean break, and there were complications, which required a couple of surgeries to make things right. As a result, I'd had to learn to write with my left hand. For the first couple of months, every motion was slow and awkward. My handwriting was so bad even I couldn't read it. And it wasn't just writing. Brushing my teeth. Eating with silverware. Even wiping my ass. I had to do all of it left-handed, which was a deeply humbling experience. Trying to use the hammer with the new mental limb was just like that. I flexed the limb, attempting to take a swing with the floating hammer, and instead I sent the tool careening across the tent. It slammed into the fabric wall and promptly slid down behind the air mattress. I sighed. Just perfect. Even though the spell had cost less than a single point of mana, I felt mentally exhausted by the effort. Most of the relics so far had simply conferred their abilities without much muss or fuss, but this one required genuine skill, it seemed. And that was with only a single strand of telekinetic energy. If I pushed this relic up to level 15, I'd be able to wield 15 different strands simultaneously. Though, honestly, even the thought of attempting to wield 2 objects simultaneously left me queasy. I wasn't about to give up, though. I'd never been the smartest, strongest, or fastest sumbitch around, but if I had a superpower, it was that I didn't know how to quit. Even when I probably should have. The sheer thickness of my skull was the stuff of legends. Using nothing more than my mind, a trickle of mana, and a truck worth of sheer willpower, I pulled the cut aside and forced the hammer back into the air. I wasn't going to let this spell beat me, especially not after spending 5,000 fucking tickets on it. For the next several hours I used a combination of Jolt Colamon elixirs and pharmacist's scales to keep the hammer aloft. It turned out to be a damn bit easier to keep my mana topped off, thanks to an exploit I hadn't even thought of. The mana capacitor sigil, baked into my stupid Versace bathrobe. Not only did mana capacitor increase my maximum mana pool by 15% and my overall regeneration rate by 10%, but it had a secondary ability called Wild Surge. Every spell I cast had a 5% chance of triggering Wild Surge, which instantly replenished up to 50% of my total mana pool, while simultaneously boosting my mana regen rate by 25% for 2 minutes. There was also an additional 50% chance of approaching a duplicate spell at no additional cost, though that mattered less in this instance. The cost of mental micromanagement was only 1 mana per minute, which was dirt cheap, but I quickly realized something important about the spell. Even though I wasn't actively recasting the spell every minute, the Varus interface acted as though I was. Which meant for every minute I had the spell running, there was a 5% chance of triggering Wild Surge. On average, running mental micromanagement for 20 minutes straight almost guaranteed that Wild Surge would activate, instantly restoring up to 50% of my mana pool. And that was only the beginning. After a little experimentation, I discovered that if I disrupted the spell, quickly cutting off the telekinetic flow, but restarted it before the end of a minute passed, that counted as a new cast, but cost no additional mana expenditure. Essentially, juggling an item in the air, stopping and restarting the telekinetic flow in rapid succession, could trigger Wild Surge almost once a minute. Best of all, the regeneration buff stacked. Between mental micromanagement and my stupid fucking bathrobe, I'd figured out a truly broken exploit to generate a nearly constant supply of mana. Even though I was tired, my discovery only enticed me to practice even harder. For the first hour or so, I just held the hammer in the air, working to keep it nice and steady and not bobbing drunkenly all over the place like a sailor returning to ship after a long night of debauchery. I also practiced starting and stopping the flow of energy while keeping the hammer airborne. Although it didn't cost much mana, the sheer concentration required was insane. Like trying to do advanced calculus while cooking pancakes and giving a cat a bath all at once. But the longer I practiced, the easier it got. Not easy, but easier. Once I could handle that, I tried doing stuff with the hammer. Move it across the room. Swing it. Hit things with it. I even tried tossing it straight up into the air, then catching it before it hit the ground. I failed more often than I succeeded, at least at first. By the third hour, I hardly dropped the hammer at all. As tired as I was, I moved into the store and started doing a little target practice. I had crock-tossed throw pillows from the home decor aisle into the air and I'd used the hammer to smack them down. It looked ridiculous, but the practice helped hone my rudimentary abilities considerably. We progressively moved to smaller and smaller items, pillows to packets of ramen noodles, then finally tennis balls, looted from the seasonal aisle. "You know, Dan," Croc said, tossing a green ball heavenward, "this reminds me of that whole montage in Breaking Dawn. the fourth and final volume in the international best-selling Twilight series, where Edward patiently trains Bella in the use of her new vampire powers. "Damn it, Croc," I growled, batting the ball away with a soft squeak. "I thought we already talked about the Twilight thing. You've got to stop comparing us to Edward and Bella. It's weird. Really, really weird. There's nothing weird about loving the Twilight series, Dan. But if it makes you feel better, I could maybe compare this to the time when Edward and Jacob had to set aside their differences and work together to take down the Volturi, though really, that unlikely friendship more closely mirrors our current relationship with Jacob." The mimic paused. "I just realized Jacob the Lizard Man has the very same name as Jacob the Werewolf. Oh, what a twisted tale of love we weave, Dan." I sighed. "Just throw the damn ball." Once I could hit an object out of the air 8 out of 10 times, I attempted to use the hammer at increasingly greater distances. The further away an object was, the harder it was to wield accurately. Although the spell description said the range was line of sight, I found my ability to keep the weapon airborne failed completely at about 60 feet. I also realized that at those further distances, utilizing my demolition screwdriver was actually much more effective. Swinging the hammer took a far greater degree of mental dexterity, while simply shanking something with a projectile was surprisingly simple. The mechanics of it were just easier. Still, progress was progress, and by the time I headed back to my tent, a pressure headache building steadily behind my eye sockets, I felt reasonably certain I could use the ability in combat without actively hurting myself or others. Plus, I could confidently trigger mental micromanagement frequently enough to ensure that Wild Surge procced, which meant I'd be able to cast more spells, faster. Satisfied with my efforts, I collapsed onto my mattress and was asleep before my head even hit the pillow. Chapter 50. 10 hours later, fully refreshed and with a stomach full of delicious breakfast pizza, we made our way back to the Jungle Gym Jamboree. Thanks to my VIP doorway anchor, getting into the arcade was as simple as the press of an elevator button. Although I knew we were walking into trouble, I felt optimistic about our chances. I had no illusions that this was safe. Funtime Frank was level 25, infected with blight, and had 4 other high-level dwellers in his corner. There was every possibility that at least one of our team members wouldn't be working away from the fight. Still, we were as ready as we were ever going to be. Everyone was rested. We had topped off our supply of medical-grade elixirs. My slammer of shielding had a full charge. And, after a decent night's sleep, my new mental micromanagement spell was working better than ever. Turned out physical and mental exhaustion made it substantially more difficult to use your mind to move shit. Who would have guessed? We made our way through the labyrinth of plastic tubes that zigzagged through the arcade. Those tubes spanned the entirety of the enormous loot arcade and were the only way to access the funhouse tent that waited at the heart of the arcade like a fat spider sitting at the center of its web. Unlike the plastic play tubes that grace most kids' play places, these were the size of sewer pipes and were easily large enough to walk in. Even with the extra headroom, they were still claustrophobically cramped, swelteringly hot, and oddly echoing, amplifying sounds in strange ways that fooled the ear. Because the spaces were so tight, we had to move in single file and engaging in physical combat would be difficult, if not impossible. There was no room to swing your arms, much less a baseball bat or giant shield. Thankfully, Temperance wasn't limited to strictly stabbing and smashing things. Although she focused on agility and dealing damage, she had a handful of useful mana-based relics that could pack a nasty punch even in close quarters. Her most disgusting spell, by far, was Ball of Spiders. It was exactly what it sounded like. Instead of hurling a ball of magic, she hurled a ball of magical spiders. The spiders all dealt a fractional point of poison damage with each bite, but there were hundreds of the long-legged critters. They served as a great distraction. Turned out, trying to concentrate on anything while being simultaneously swarmed by a couple hundred spiders was no easy task. Hell, walking through a single strand of spider webbing was enough to send me into a fit of panic for a few seconds. I couldn't even begin to imagine what I would do against a spell like that. Probably try to set myself on fire. She also had a DPS ability called Smallpox Blanket that afflicted anyone she cut with super smallpox. Lesions would erupt across the victim's body, dealing disease damage for 5 minutes or until they were healed. And healing was almost always necessary, because every time one of the pus-filled lesions burst, the effect duration would reset. Much like Temperance herself, the skill was super messed up on every conceivable level. But, also like Temperance, it was very, very effective. She also had 2 crowd control abilities. Puritanical chains conjured ghostly chains that would root a single target in place for 20 seconds. Her second crowd control spell was Witch Hunt Hysteria. If the target's grit was low enough, relative to the caster, Witch Hunt Hysteria had a 50% chance of inducing a state of hysteria, causing enemies to turn against one another. The pair of spells made for an excellent, and devastating, combo. She took point, with me right behind her serving as the trap finder and navigator. Croc came next. The dog constantly tried to wedge itself between me and the wall so we could walk beside each other. There wasn't enough room for that, but Croc's attempts were both endearing and oddly reassuring. Jacob brought up the rear, ready to deploy his shields in case anything tried to flank us from behind. The tubes themselves were more disorienting than dangerous. There were hundreds of different branching pathways, and without an erring arrow to guide us, I had no idea how we ever would have found our way through the warren of plastic. There was a smattering of traps along with a handful of different dwellers, who all called the tube city home. The most prevalent were the packs of feral crotch goblins. 2 feet tall with pudgy legs and plump cherubic faces, they almost would have been cute if not for the bloodred eyes, the jagged needle-like teeth, and a wailing cry both loud and persistent enough to drive anyone to madness. On top of all that, the crotch goblins were blighted, cancerous growths littered their tiny bodies, which made them nightmares to handle. The worst residents by far, however, were the ball pit berries. We had to take several long, twisting slides on our way to the big top. Initially Croc was excited, but most of them were filled with traps of one kind or another. Nails embedded into the plastic, or saw blades that popped up from the floor, or razor wire, stretched tight across the tunnel, meant to decapitate riders as they flew past. Using my telekinesis and my new trap with spry bar, I managed to disarm the whole lot of them with relative ease. But if slides were involved, there was simply no getting around the ball pit berries. Each slide dumped us into knee-deep pits filled with colorful plastic balls. Ball pits like that were a staple at every place I'd ever seen. Kids loved them despite the pits being disgustingly unsanitary and cesspools of disease. Naturally, all of the balls were sentient. They were also all named Barry for reasons I couldn't fathom. The little shit spit acid and hurled the nastiest playground insults I'd ever heard. One called me fat and another said, and I quote, "You're what happens when a mommy drinks during pregnancy." One of the berries told Temperance that she was the reason God didn't talk to humanity anymore, and Croc had to endure a host of Twilight-themed insults. Edward should have cured cancer instead of going to high school. Jacob imprinting on Reen's me was the dumbest plot device in modern literature. The writing in the Twilight series is only okay. Croc was nearly reduced to tears. And killing the berries only made things worse, not better. For every berry killed, 2 more would spawn, both even louder and more vicious than the original. They were like hydras. Except plastic. And meaner. Thankfully, the berries wouldn't abandon their ball pits, so all we had to do was endure the weak acid spray and insult torrents long enough to clamber back into the tubes. It took us the better part of 2 hours, but finally we arrived at an enormous slide that reminded me of a yawning gullet. Hanging above the cavernous maw was a brightly lit sign that read "Funtime Frank's Funhouse, this way." When I cast unerring arrow, the ghostly blue line erupted from my chest and disappeared down the slide, quickly vanishing out of sight. "Welp, here goes nothing," I muttered, sitting down on the platform then pushing my body into the darkness beyond. I braced my hands and feet against the slide walls to slow my downward descent. At the same time, I used my new telekinetic ability to keep my modlight hovering in the air, its beam illuminating the darkened tube ahead of me. I went slowly, searching for traps. For the first time since entering the labyrinth, I found none. When I got to the bottom, I hollered back up the curving slide, giving the all-clear for the others to follow. Once everyone had safely made it down, we pushed our way through a red and white striped canvas flap and into what looked like the interior of a traveling circus tent. Old-timey light bulbs dangled from the peaked canopy, radiating outward, reminding me once more of a spider's web. The air was heavy with the sickly sweet scent of cotton candy intermingling with stale popcorn and a musky scent that reminded me of the zoo. The floor was covered with hay and peanut shells, which cracked and crunched with each footstep. Temperance could move like a ghost when she had a mind to, and even she made a racket loud enough to wake the dead. Trying to be stealthy here would be next to impossible. Ahead, there were 4 raised platforms, each about 5 feet tall. 2 on the left, 2 more off to the right. Resting atop each platform was a circus wagon. Garish red and gold things with huge wheels and open sides. The 4 wagons were empty, but I imagined they wouldn't stay that way for long. The far side of the tent was shrouded in a cloak of darkness so thick I couldn't see shit even when I turned on the Moglight. The beam simply hit the darkness and stopped as though the gloom were actually a solid wall, forged from pure shadow. I looked a question at Temperance and Jacob, hoping either might have some answers. Jacob frowned and shook his head, while the murder bunny simply shrugged and pulled her cleaver free with one hand. "Any idea what we should do here, Croc?" I asked. "Turn around and go get Froyo," the dog offered, sounding both scared and apologetic. "Sorry, buddy," I replied with a sigh, "we've come too far for that." "Oh, fiddlesticks," Croc replied, tail drooping in defeat. "I was afraid you were going to say that." "Everyone stay close," I said softly, "and keep an eye on those platforms." I kept my hands free, while my demolition screwdriver floated just above my left shoulder. I could send the thing flying forward like a spear with a thought. With Croc to my left, Temperance to the right, and Jacob once more bringing up the rear, I edged forward, using Spelunker's sixth sense to scan for traps, mimics, or any other nasty surprises looking to send us all to an early grave. I didn't see anything. No pitfalls, pressure plates, or mono snares. The peanuts and hay continued to crunch underfoot, not that it mattered much. There was still no sign of Frank or his animatronic jamboree. At least, not until we made it to the center of the room. Although I couldn't see any sort of pressure plate or mechanical switch, I distinctly heard an audible click, followed by the rumble of an unseen motor and the metallic clanking of great gears groaning into motion. "It's a trap," Jacob hollered, though it was already too late for the warning. A huge metal cage erupted from the hay-covered floor, shooting upward to form a dome that encompassed the entirety of the tent's interior. In a heartbeat, we found ourselves trapped inside a carnival version of the Thunderdome. The purpose of the cage was immediately obvious. It was there to cut off any attempt at retreat. We were trapped, and I had a sinking suspicion the walls wouldn't drop until either Frank was dead or we were. I winced as a terrible mechanical grinding noise filled the air and overhead spotlights kicked on. Buttery yellow beams of illumination fell on each of the circus wagons. 4 animatronic figures rose from the pillar-like platforms in a hiss of multicolored steam, as though they'd been hidden away in elevator shafts below, just waiting for a group of morons to blunder into their lair. Colorful neon signs flashed above the 4 wagons, proclaiming each of their names. On the left was Cynthia Lynx, the guitar synthesizer, and Drumbo Chumbo, the pachyderm percussionist. Off to the right were Vex Vixen, the foxy violinist, and Bellatrix Black, the bassist bear. They were all level 20, which I'd been expecting. Their appearance, on the other hand, was wholly unexpected. In my head, I'd envisioned these things as sleek robots, meticulously crafted from chrome, rivets, and neon. Like something ripped out of Blade Runner. I couldn't have been more wrong. These horror shows looked like they'd crawled out of a bad taxidermy shop. Cynthia was the unholy bastard child of a human and a cyborg, all wrapped in the mangy fur of a lynx. Her fur had been dyed electric blue and was crisscrossed with splotchy green stripes, but even at a distance it was easy to spot the mangled seams and crude stitches crisscrossing her body and limbs. Her eyes, which were strangely human, burned with an unnatural blue fire, like bottled lightning. Her hands, a crude merging of human fingers and furry paws, danced effortlessly over a hot pink guitar, half piano, which appeared to be a direct extension of her body. A mangy tail swayed rhythmically behind her. I'd more or less made peace with the fact that Temperance was a furry. I wasn't comfortable with it exactly, but it didn't bother me either. But these things were the stuff of living nightmares personified. And it wasn't just Cynthia the Lynx. They were all like that. Horrible amalgamations of humanity, machine, and zoo creature. Drumbo Chumbo was an enormous gray elephant with pebbled hide tightly stretched over a metallic frame. A series of drumheads, each covered with pale tan skin, was embedded directly into the creature's gargantuan stomach, while a pair of brassy cymbals dangled from both tusks. He wielded a pair of heavy mallets and weirdly human-shaped hands. His eyes, like Cynthia's, were oddly human and seemed to be crying out for help. Crying for a release from this cruel existence. Vex Vixen was bright crimson fox, much smaller than the others, and covered in uneven patches of fur and shiny copper plates. Her tail swished back and forth in time with the pounding beat of Drumbo's percussion work while a purple bow zipped and weaved over a zebra-striped violin. The last of the four was arguably the most disturbing of all. Bellatrix had the hulking form of a black bear, red muscle and gleaming chrome peeking out from beneath her butchered fur, but the face of a human woman. This woman, whoever she'd been, was beautiful. Her nose straight and refined, her jaw strong with high cheekbones. Unlike the rest, her eyes had been plucked out and replaced by gleaming yellow orbs that pulsed in time with the music. Her claws picked and thumbed at the thick strings of her bass guitar, driving the frantic rhythm of their song. Naturally, they were playing a synthwave remix of the Final Countdown, because of course they fucking were. This whole place was like an single quote 80s LSD fever dream. As the music crashed through the circus ring, another overhead spotlight, even larger than the others, burst to life, illuminating the far section of circus tent, previously cloaked in darkness. And there, standing at the precipice of a series of stadium-style seats, waiting for his grand reveal, was Funtime Frank. "You've got to be fucking shitting me," I grumbled, running one hand through my hair. Chapter 51. "Hey," Croc said from beside me, "Funtime Frank's a gorilla." Funtime Frank was indeed a gorilla. Or at least, predominantly gorilla shape. Frank was covered in grimy black fur, speckled with silver, and had beady, deep-set eyes that burned like hot coals. He was easily 8 feet tall, 4 feet across the shoulders, and had arms that were bigger than my torso. An electric blue tie dangled from a neck as thick as a tree trunk, and a fat cigar protruded from the corner of Frank's all-too-human mouth, letting out a constant plume of smoke. Stacked beside the gargantuan gorilla were colorful barrels. Some blue, others green. More fire-engined red or deep purple. The moment I saw those barrels, I realized the awful, terrible truth. Just as the mobile murder muncher from the third floor arcade had been a nightmare version of Pac-Man, Frank was an acid trip parody of Donkey Kong. Barrels included. "I thought you said gorillas wouldn't be involved in any part of the process," Croc added, tilting its head to one side as it regarded the arcade boss. "Nope," I replied softly, my eyes still locked on the massive simian. "What I said was that if there are gorillas involved at any point in the process, things have gone wildly off the rails." "Oh, fiddlesticks. Does that mean things have gone wildly off the rails, Dan?" "I think we're about to find out," I replied as the codex generated a new entry. Dweller 0.7824a, Funtime Frank, Arcade Boss. Blighted, Level 24. Funtime Frank is a mad scientist's wet dream. The perfect blend of man and machine, all gift-wrapped with the primal prowess of an embalmed silverback gorilla. Make no mistake, this monstrous neon-drenched mashup is a blast from the past who is ready to fuck up your future. Although the stage-dominating simian is more than happy to leave the spotlight and turn you into pink mist with his reinforced metal fists, he prefers to do his dirty work from a distance. Those barrels of his They're far more than wood and nails. Some go boom. Others. They're full of skin-melting goo. But the best ones? Those are packed with hordes of horrific animatronic murder minions, all hell-bent on achieving a single objective, wrecking your shit. Killing Frankie Boy ain't easy, especially since he isn't a solo act. Frank's the charismatic frontman of the Funtime Jamboree. You'll need to send Frank's bandmates, Vex Vixen, Bellatrix Black, Cynthia Lynx, and Drumbo Chumbo, packing before you have a snowball's chance in hell of hurting him. Thing is, their beats don't just slap, they shield Funtime Frank with powerful buffs that make him, well, not invulnerable exactly. But there's not really another good word that fits. Hope you're ready to dance, because Funtime Frank is here to party, and his parties involve copious amounts of cocaine and murder. Though mostly murder. Current active effects: melodic shield, beat of war, string sorrow, bass boost. My eyes raced over the words, quickly parsing between the flavor text and the actual meat of the description. The long and short of it was that Frank was one bad SOB. He had a host of ranged attacks, could summon minions, and was basically invulnerable until we took out the other 4 band members that were buffing him through the gills. The only upside, and it was a big upside, was that my Stenslayer Maelstrom spells would likely affect the band, since they were at least partially composed of organic matter. What do we do here? Temperance yelled to be heard over the pumping beat of the drums and the buzzing drone of the guitar. Classic arcade setup, I called back. We need to take out the band first. Otherwise, attacking Frank won't do anything. But watch out for his barrels. They all have different effects. I'm thinking we split up. There's 4 band members and 4 of us. Math makes it pretty simple. Much as I hated to split the party, we couldn't afford to focus all of our attention on one single target. If we tried that, it would open us up to all sorts of nasty attacks. Especially with an invulnerable Frank chucking exploding barrels at us when we weren't looking. Fine by me, Temperance said, gaze sweeping over the 4 members of the band. Her eyes narrowed when they landed on Cynthia, the guitar-playing Lynx. The cat bitch is mine, she growled, already prowling forward. She looked more like a hunting wolf than a timid bunny. I eyed up the Elephant Man, hammering away at his drums. He looked powerful but slow. As long as I kept that son of a bitch from landing a blow, I could probably take him. I've got the Elephant Man. I glanced right at the other 2 remaining band members. The fox looked like the least dangerous of the 4, while the bear was legitimately one of the most distressing things I'd ever laid eyes on. And that included the mobile murder muncher from the 3rd floor arcade. Croc, you've got the fox. You can count on me, Dan, the dog replied, taking off like a blue rocket. The mimic shifted as it moved, its body swelling up and out, until it was easily as large as any of the Uncanny Valley robots. Jacob, I grabbed a hold of the Central before he could take off too. Keep my dog safe, okay? I couldn't live with myself if anything happened to the big blue idiot. I'll do what I can, the man replied with a shallow dip of his head. Then he turned on his heel and took off after Croc at a dead sprint. I turned my attention back toward Temperance, who was already rapidly closing the distance with Cynthia Lynx. Although the striped guitar player was buffing Frank, she wasn't content to stand by while Temperance attacked. The Catwoman turned toward the approaching murder bunny and let loose a jagged riff of discordant notes that sent chills racing along my spine. Power built in brilliant streaks of blue lightning lanced downward, stabbing at the ground with furious vengeance. The bunny was lightning fast herself, though, and easily dodged each of the attacks. The bolts of energy pockmarked the floor, leaving behind a series of smoking divots. As quick as Temperance was, however, she wasn't ready when Drumbo Chumbo, the elephant percussionist, brought a huge foot slamming down. The ground rumbled and a huge fissure zigzagged across the floor, threatening to swallow Temperance. The murder bunny dove to the right at the last possible moment, narrowly avoiding the crack spreading along the ground, but she didn't avoid the purple barrel, which sideswiped her like a Mack truck. The barrel didn't explode on impact, which was a small mercy. Instead, It shattered, wooden shrapnel flying out in every direction as a score of butchered cyborg monkeys scampered out, screeching loudly and waving their arms in the air. Dweller 0.734D, Reanimated Murder Monkey Level 4. Ever wonder what happens to all the lab monkeys once the scientists are done with them? Yeah, now you don't have to wonder. Monkeys in a barrel? Really? I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was anyway. It genuinely would have been funny if not for the fact that the reanimated monkeys were about 5 seconds away from ripping Temperance's throat out. The creatures charged with reckless abandon before the furry could gain her feet. With a thought, I sent my screwdriver shooting forward like a bullet fired from a high-powered rifle. The tool punched into one monkey's throat with enough force to blast clean out the other side in a geyser of black gore. 2 more monkeys had broken off from the pack and were attempting to flank me from the left and right. The floating screwdriver pirouetted in midair, then slammed into the monkey on the left. I thrust my right hand out and unleashed a concentrated beam of pressurized water that sliced the other monkey clean in two. 3 more monkeys had converged on Temperance, who was still struggling to gain her feet. They were scrambling all over her, teeth biting at her arms, claws raking at her skin. One was even yanking on her hair. But she wasn't taking things lying down, even though she was technically lying down. Her meat cleaver was a blur. She decapitated one monkey, then sliced the arm off another. She leveled her free hand and hurled a ball of spiders right into the face of the third. The monkey screeched in terror, showing far more emotion than I would have expected as it stumbled back a few paces, swatting madly at the bugs. Temperance brought one boot up and slammed it into the creature's stomach, propelling it backward. I cut it down with another quick pulse of pressure washer, then rushed over and hauled her to her feet. "I know you like to work alone," I yelled, fending off yet another monkey with my screwdriver lance, "but if we are going to survive this, we need to work together. And, in this case, that means staying together." She rolled her eyes but nodded. "Just try not to slow me down too much." Back in the Marine Corps we had this saying. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. She grinned. My people had a saying as well, fast is fast. But I suppose we can try it your way. We'd killed about half of the mechanical monkeys, but more were closing in. Temperance drew her bat and pointed it at the pack of feral apes like it was a magic wand. Venitas vinificae surgit. A writhing ball of green light flashed from the tip of the blunt weapon and slammed into the encroaching wave of monkeys. When the ball hit, it exploded into a fine mist, tendrils of green magic boring into noses and eyes and mouths. Half the monkeys turned and violently hurled themselves at the other half, screeching frantically as civil war broke out among their ranks. We let them fight it out amongst themselves as we closed the distance with Cynthia Lynx. Another barrel, this one bright red, arched toward us from the stadium seats, but this one I sniped from the air with a thread of water. Good thing too, since it exploded, releasing a billowing cloud of orange and red flames. Cynthia jabbed at the keyboard once more, conjuring another discordant jangle of music. Energy built, but I cast sterilization field for 40 mana. The dome of blue-white light rippled outward, enveloping both me and Temperance before Cynthia's lightning lances had finished forming. The bolts of power still penetrated the shell, but passing through the wall of light reduced their strength by half. Temperance soaked up 20 damage, which shaved off 7% of her HP. An errant bolt slammed into my shoulder for 7 points of damage on contact, sending a jolt of electricity racing along my arm. I shook the pain away with a grimace. "Get up there," I yelled now that we were finally in range. "I'll take out Tiny." I waved toward the elephant mon. Temperance nodded curtly, then backpedaled a few steps and sprang upward, running across the air, until she landed on the raised platform housing Cynthia. A green nimbus flared to life around her as she lashed out with her baseball bat. Cynthia met the blow with her guitar, turning the strike, then retaliated with a brutal front kick. Temperance danced away, just out of reach, then finted left and rolled right, unleashing another spider bolt at the Lynx. Much as I wanted to, I couldn't watch the fight. I had Drumbo Chumbo to deal with, not to mention several more incoming barrels. Funtime Frank had launched a trio of barrels in rapid-fire succession. One red, one purple, one neon green. Purple was more reanimated minions and red was a firebomb. The neon green was new. I raised my hand and launched another jet of water at the red barrel, silently praying the ensuing explosion would take out the other two barrels. But just in case they didn't, I launched my screwdriver at the green barrel like an anti-air missile. In my book, there was no such thing as overkill. I even had the title to prove it. The beam of water triggered the firebomb barrel. It exploded in another room-shaking blaze of oranges, reds, and golds, but unfortunately the blast radius didn't take out the other two incoming projectiles. The screwdriver also ricocheted ineffectively off the side of the green container, spinning away then landing on the floor with a clatter. Well, shit. Drumbo was winding up for another stomp attack, and I didn't have time to take out both barrels with water pulse. Unless a truly unhinged idea occurred to me, but I really had nothing to lose, so why not roll the dice? Chapter 52 I aimed my hand like a finger gun and unleashed a jet of water, blowing the purple minion barrel to pieces. In the same instant, I cut the flows of telekinetic energy to my screwdriver and reactivated the spell, reaching outward toward the green barrel with an invisible limb of mental might. I'd practiced the same maneuver with my hammer 100 times before. This was no different, just on a bigger scale. My mental limb enveloped the barrel at the speed of thought, and I felt something groan in protest within my core. Mental micromanagement could only move things up to 45 pounds, and the green barrel was at the very edge of my limits. Perspiration instantly slicked my face and chest. My whole body trembled as though I were squatting at max capacity. But, by the good Lord Almighty, the barrel came to a wavering halt a handful of feet from the ground. Then with a roar, I hurled the barrel right at the lumpy, gray-skinned elephant drummer. It cartwheeled through the air and slammed into the wagon with a splintering crash. The barrel burst and a burbling green goo splattered all over Drumbo. The elephant man trumpeted in a combination of pain and rage. Whatever attack he'd been preparing to launch was suddenly forgotten as he tried desperately to scrape away the face-melting acid. An achievement notice pinged in the corner of my eye, though thankfully, it didn't materialize. Just a small icon blinking on and off before disappearing. Drumbo was taken care of for the moment, but I had another problem to deal with. My water jet had effectively turned the purple barrel into a barrage of wood and shrapnel, but the monkeys inside had sustained only minimal damage. Several monkey corpses rained from the sky and splattered against the ground. Most of the monkeys inside had sustained only minimal damage, I amended. A few had been turned into ribbons of meat and fur. More monkeys hit the ground, but these ones were alive and pissed. To be fair, I also would have been pissed had the circumstances been reversed. With a shrieking howl, the remaining apes charged, simian feet and hands scrambling for purchase, lips pulled back in a rabid rictus. I smirked, a feral gesture, and reached inward, tapping into my most powerful spell. My eye exploded outward and great blue-white clouds formed in a swirling, churning mass. Corrosive rain fell not in fits and spurts, but in a torrential sheet. Great fat droplets of super bleach drenched the reanimated monkeys. None of the minions were above level 7, and the spell reduced them to disgusting globs of gristle and fur in a matter of seconds. One lone monkey, on the very edge of the hour spell, managed to escape with a handful of HP still intact, though its skin was already slewing off. I snagged my screwdriver from the ground with mental micromanagement and sent it hurtling through the creature's skull, killing it instantly. The telekinesis spell proxed Wild Surge, instantly boosting my available mana from a mere 23 points all the way up to 78 points. Still a long way from full, but more than enough to kill Drumbo. The sterilization field around me guttered and died, but I ignored it as I skirted the fallout from the bleach maelstrom and made my way toward the elephant mon. Drumbo saw me coming and jumped from his wagon, landing on the ground with a thunderous rumble. The acid from the green barrel had chewed through much of the elephant's pebbly gray hide. Its hit points had dropped by a full third. Red muscle, glistening yellow fat, and the metallic glint of pistons and gears showed through its ruined exterior. Drumbo slammed an oversized mallet against one of the drum heads embedded in its stomach. Earthen spikes erupted from the floor beneath me. My spelunker's sixth sense flashed a warning, a heartbeat before it was too late. I scrambled to the right, but one of the rocky spears punched through the sole of my boot, skewering my foot. My quick reaction speed had kept me from being impaled through something vital, like my guts or spine, but the pain was still excruciating. The rocky spear also prevented me from running. The stone protrusion was only half an inch in diameter, but the damn thing was a good 3 feet long. Drumbo raised a foot, and I knew what was coming. He was going to split the earth again. Conjure a fissure to swallow me whole. I didn't give him the chance. I activated pressure washer and brought the beam of water slashing across his upraised shin. The acid from the green barrel had already chewed through his hide and the underlying muscle beneath. The beam of water severed the remainder of the tendons and connective tissue. The lower portion of Drumbo's leg fell off in a spray of scarlet blood and black motor oil. An almost comically shocked expression flashed across Drumbo's face, and then the elephant drummer tumbled like a felled tree. He landed hard enough to rattle my teeth. His health had dropped to half and it didn't look like he could get up. That didn't mean he wasn't still a deadly threat. A rabid animal, with its back in a corner and no other options, was the most dangerous sort of monster. But his injuries bought me enough time to handle the shaft of rock piercing my foot. I pulled my hammer free, braced myself, then took a swing at the spear. I'd been driving in nails for years and years, so my aim was true. The hammer shattered the rocky spear just above the top of my boot. It was a perfect hit. Didn't matter. A renewed wave of agony roared downward just from the sheer vibration of the hammer blow. The pain was so intense I thought I might pass out. That or puke. Maybe both. With the wound throbbing and screaming, I jerked my foot straight up. Blood gushed out the bottom of my boot, leaving a puddle on the hay below. I fished a lesser Zima from my tool belt and chugged it. Sweet, delicious relief spread through my foot like a soothing balm as my HP recovered. That really hurt, you cockwomble, I growled, closing in on the downed elephant. Drumbo raised his mallet again, but before he could strike the drum, my screwdriver impaled his hand, pinning the appendage to the ground. Doesn't feel good, does it? I screamed. Then I was on top of him, blinded by rage and pain and fear. My hammer fell again and again, giving me flashbacks to Natasha Anno. I'd killed her the same way. I suppressed the internal revulsion and triggered gavel of get fucked. Because Drumbo's HP had just dipped below the 10% threshold, the skill instantly triggered killing blow. Power erupted from the end of the hammer. What remained of the elephant's big fat head just exploded, splattering me with blood and bits of bone matter. But that wasn't all. Since I'd effectively landed a killing blow with the gavel, the cascading effect, Wave of Justice, triggered next. Wave of Justice applied the gavel's primary effect to all enemy combatants within a 20-foot radius. In this case, that meant dealing damage equal to 20% of the opponent's existing health pool, with a max cap of 250 damage. Vex Vixen and Bellatrix Black were both outside of the spell's range, but Cynthia Lynx wasn't. I turned in time to see Crimson Power wrap around the guitar player like the hand of an angry god. As it happened, Temperance had already dropped her below 10% HP as well, which meant killing blow triggered for a second time in as many seconds. The Lynx's head just popped. Like an overinflated balloon filled with red paint. Gore splattered across Temperance's pink bunny suit, but she didn't even flinch. If anything, she looked happy as a clam. A psycho, bloodthirsty clam. She turned on a furry heel and surveyed the carnage. Not bad, she said, before leaping lightly from the platform and landing in a crouch. Maybe I underestimated you. This level of destruction is truly impressive. Appreciate it, I replied, but we can pat ourselves on the backs once we take out Gorilla Boy, there. I glanced in Funtime Frank's direction and a curious thing happened. His nameplate popped up again, but it had changed. Dweller 0.78280, Funtime Frank, Arcade Boss. Blighted, Level 27, Current Active Effects, Bass Boost. Holy shit. The monkey fucker had gone up a grand total of 3, count 'em, 3, levels. That couldn't be good. The fact that he was down to a single active effect, base boost, was a small victory, though. It probably meant that Croc and Jacob had killed one of the other band members. I turned and spotted the mangled remnants of the fox violinist in a lumpy pile. All that remained was a combination of guts and wires strewn out across the gaudy, gilded wagon. We weren't out of the woods yet, though. Croc and Jacob were going toe-to-toe with the final member of the band, Bellatrix Black, the bassist bear. Things did not appear to be going well. Bellatrix was easily the largest and most terrifying of all the band members, and she left the safety of her podium, apparently preferring to take the fight directly to Jacob and Croc. The bear's HP was still above 80%, while Jacob's was below 70% and Croc was down by half. Fuck. There were also more barrels incoming. I grabbed Temperance by the arm and shoved her toward the colossal woman bear. "Go help them," I yelled. "I'll take care of Frank." "I thought you'd never ask." She offered me a Cheshire grin that seemed to spread from ear to ear, then bolted toward the bear without an ounce of hesitation. I turned back toward the stadium bleachers. There were 4 more barrels careening toward me this time, 2 purple barrels, 1 red, and a final one that was cobalt blue. Clearly, I'd pissed off Frank and now he'd taken off the kid gloves. Taking out the purple barrels would be a waste of time, since it wouldn't stop the reanimated monkeys anyway. I had no idea what the blue one did, so I sniped that one first with a blast of water. The barrel shattered on impact and a cloud of blue gas swirled through the air but quickly dissipated. Even though the blue mist never touched the ground, the temperature in the tent dropped by at least 10 degrees. Some sort of frost attack, then. I telekinetically snagged the final barrel from the air with a grunt of effort and a metric shitload of willpower. The barrel slowed, the liquid inside sloshing ominously around. Then, just for shits and giggles, I returned the barrel to the center with a flick of my wrist. True, Frank was invulnerable as long as Bellatrix the bass-playing bear was alive and kicking, but I was hoping that protection didn't extend to the barrels stacked in a large pile beside a huge gorilla. King Kong let out a bellow and stretched a giant hand toward the incoming barrel, but he was just a hair too slow. The cherry red bomb smashed into the other barrels, setting off a cascading series of explosions so loud and intense, I thought it was going to bring the tent down on top of our heads. I dropped to the deck, pressing my belly against the dirt, though I kept one eye out for any other inbound threats. A fireball, mixed with swirls of electric blue and neon green, billowed up like a miniature mushroom cloud, and Frank disappeared behind a wall of blinding light. The heat of the explosion singed my face and kicked up a hail of peanut shells. When the fireball finally receded and vanished entirely, I hesitantly gained my feet. I brushed my hands off and surveyed the scope of the utter devastation. The stadium seats were just gone. In their place was a smoking, charred black crater. Tope continued,